Well, welcome to Game Jam's How to Succeed in Your First or 100th Jam. We are avid game jammers and we love sharing the good news about game jams with all of you. So I'm very pleased to see so many people here, so many Waluigis, and everyone here. We have a lot of cool tips to show you and some cool examples of game jams and work that we've made in game jams. So let's get started. Just an opening note, I know this wasn't in the guidebook, but this panel is about video games. I don't know if it was clear, this was not about board games, so if you like tabletop stuff, you can get out. I'm just kidding, but there are all kinds of game jams, like for board games, card games. There's like 48-hour filmmaking festivals. There's all kinds of jams, but this one is this talk is specifically about video games. So for example, we're showing some examples of games that were created in jams, like the prototype for Surgeon Simulator. That was created at a global game jam in 48 hours. And then they worked on the game and polished it and did a full release. So just an example of where game jams can take you. So we kind of have two levels of tips. We have our beginner mode. Those are for people who have never jammed before, or maybe you don't know how to make art or music or code. We'll have tips for newbies, and we'll also have tips for veterans. So those are people who've done multiple jams or, you know, a bunch of jams, and you just want to find ways to get better at jamming.
And a quick question. Who here has done a game jam before? Awesome. Brilliant.
Wow.
Okay. So yeah, we'll really try to give some tips to help you kick up a notch on your next game jam.
So who we are, we'll go through this left to right. I'm Ruthie Edwards. I'm a UX designer. I live in New York City. I've done 35 game jams, which sounds insane when I'm saying that out loud, but it is true.
I'm Valentina Hawes. I'm a 3D artist, creature artist, game artist from Richmond, Virginia. I've done 12 game jams. It doesn't feel like that many when I'm looking at you two. I thought it was impressive, but...
That is definitely impressive. Anything over, 2 or 3 is very impressive. So I'm Momin. I'm also from Richmond. I mostly focus on like programming and design. And yeah, I've done like 39 game jams, but 10 of those were all in one game jam where you make 10 games in 10 days. So I kind of cheated my numbers there a little bit, but yeah.
That's legit. That's not cheating.
Yeah.
So cool. We'll talk about what is a game jam. So if you're a veteran, like many of you are, you can tune out for like 30 seconds while we go through this. A game jam is an event where you make a video game from scratch, all the pieces and parts of it, all the art, code, music, everything. You can do it solo or with a group, and it usually has some sort of theme or a constraint, generally time constraint, and often 48 hours is a common time constraint. Why you should jam? There's so many reasons to jam. First of all, it's how I got into game development, so it's a way to kickstart your skills. You can make new friends. That's how I met all these fine people, all my best friends, through game jamming. Learning new things, learning new software, learning new techniques, working on your soft skills, all kinds of things. And then it's really important to also be able to finish something, to say, I made this game, it's done, I put it online, other people can play it. It's very impressive to most people, including my mom. She's always very excited when I say, I made a game, here it is, and then she gets to play it. And then here's another example. Baba Is You was created in 48 hours, the prototype for it, not the full game, at Nordic Game Jam.
You can go for it.
Go for it.
Cool. So here's some tips for why you should jam for beginners and for veterans. So if you're a beginner and you really want to make a game, jamming is the fastest way to do it. It's the fastest way to pick up all of those skills. At the end of that jam, you're going to have something and you can call it a game. And in that 48-hour span, it's like no game, yes game, amazing. So it's the lowest barrier to entry. The games that you make at a jam don't need to be good or pretty because there's a constraint. It's understood that it's not going to be this perfect, amazing thing at the end. And you can also meet collaborators whose skills complement yours. If you're a programmer and you're like, I can't do art, somebody else can do the art for you. You can combine your skills. It makes things attainable that might seem really overwhelming on your own. And then for veterans, if you've already done this before, you're already a game developer or someone in an adjacent career, you can build prototypes for full games later very quickly. It's a good way to iterate on ideas with alone or with your team. You can challenge yourself to learn new languages, software, art styles, whatever your skill is. It's a good way to experiment, and you can have those limitations challenge you to create new and interesting things. You can also take a leadership position in a jam. You can coach newcomers, and you can find other collaborators to work with for future projects, and you can quickly build your portfolio by jamming frequently.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, we've applied to different game studio kind of jobs and also non-game jobs, which are more in the design field. And just having these game jams on your portfolio is a really awesome way to just show people, hey, here's what I can do in a short amount of time. It's really valuable.
So here's the tips, the things you actually came here for. First, we'll talk about preparing for a jam. Generally, when you're not allowed to start working on a game before the jam starts, but you can set up some things ahead of time that's not cheating. So we have some tips for you. The first thing is to make sure you have all of your software set up. I can't count the number of times I've gone to a jam and realized I don't have Unity on my computer and have to install it, and it's slow because everyone else is doing the same thing.
Or the newest version. You might have the old one from 6 months ago.
Yeah. So make sure you have your IDE or your graphics editor, all that stuff set up ahead of time. And also set up your file organization and make sure your team is on board with that. If you're working with something easy like Google Drive or something harder like GitHub, make sure your artists understand how to push things to it, or just use something simpler. So figuring out where you're going to put your files to collaborate on, forming your team and setting up, say, a Discord channel or some way of communicating, and then setting a goal for yourself. This is one that a lot of people overlook. So think about what you want to get out of the jam before you start jamming. Do you want to learn something new? Do you want to complete something? Do you want to make something for a good cause? What is your goal?
I think that's especially relevant if you're a veteran. If you've done 2 or 3, you're wondering, what should I focus on the 4th or 5th? You should really have a specific goal to help you grow.
Ideation and theme. Don't rush the process. The concept is probably the most important thing you can come up with in a game jam. And so here's an example of some ideation process. So this is an iconic scene from the movie Knives Out, right? But have you seen the storyboards for this movie? This is the real storyboard for the movie. But it just goes to show you that everyone can draw, everyone can sketch. It doesn't matter about the quality of the drawing as long as it conveys the idea effectively. So we're talking about sketching your ideas, iterating really quickly, not being afraid to make terrible, messy things because they can be great too.
We have another example from a game jam that we did. This is a creative process at work, and you can see our final game here, which actually ended up getting played by Vine Sauce on YouTube. So shoot for the stars. Humble beginnings.
Take your time with concepting. I think in a 48-hour jam, it seems tempting to just launch Unity and start making stuff right away, but it's worth it to take time to sketch as many ideas as you can. I usually spend the first night just sketching ideas and trying to come up with concepts. It also helps to bounce ideas off of another person, or you can rubber duck it, which is where you speak to a rubber duck or an inanimate object, basically just saying your idea out loud. Or maybe you can find a very chatty Uber driver. The people around here love to talk in the car. I don't know why. They don't do that in New York. So yeah, spend a lot of time coming up with the concept. That needs to be the strongest thing before you begin.
Yeah, so I think a big challenge I've experienced with themes is you come up with 100 different ideas. How do you know which one you should actually spend the whole weekend on? So to me, if you're a beginner, I think you should really look for something that excites you, something that really sets your brain ablaze. You're like, oh wow, this has so many different pathways that I can go down, so many interesting problems. And that's really important, because if you're not interested in the idea, you're not gonna get to the end of the game jam. It's going to get really hard. You're going to have stuff in your life that comes up, and you're going to maybe drop the game jam before it's done. But if it's something that really excites you, that will push you through to the end. And that's really important for your first game jam, is actually getting to the end, so you have that finished product and you're really proud of it. And then if you've done this a ton of times, I think it's really valuable to try to surprise the audience. We do Global Game Jam very often, and Ludum Dare is another game jam, and there's thousands of games that are produced in these. And if you can kind of stand out from the pack and surprise the players, I think that's a really good goal once you reach 4, 5, 6 game jams. And my trick for this is throw away your first 10 ideas, because those are kind of the more obvious ideas, and probably tons of other people in the game jam have thought those ideas. But once you go past that, you start to get into this really weird territory with original ideas.
Scoping your idea. So the main obstacle to actually completing a game jam is trying to bring an unreasonably big idea to life. So for example, your scope is this big. You're coming into the jam saying, I want to make a multiplayer MMO RPG with VR and this and that. You're never going to get all that done. So this is what your scope should be. It should be this big. You want to boil your idea down as small as possible. So thinking about the mechanics, maybe limit yourself to just 1 or 2. Don't start thinking about, well, we're going to have this number of characters and this number of levels. Just try to do one thing at a time, and if you have time you can add more, but your game should be as easy to explain in less than 5 seconds, or else you'll have a hard time completing it. So for example, don't scope something like this if you're a newcomer. This is actually a pretty complicated game, right? There's a character, you have to do character animation, there's enemies, so there's AI there, there's these item boxes, there's jumping, there's scoring, there's a timer, there's so much stuff in this just simple looking game. Instead, you'll want to scope something like this. So this is what we call gray boxing. So just using gray boxes to represent things. So aim for something like this, and then you can dress it up later. But that allows you to really focus on getting that jump mechanic just perfect.
I think this is a great example, because when you say small scope, a lot of people think games like Mario and these small 2D games, but even that is way too big of a scope for a game jam. You got to go way, way, way smaller. Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, so I think a great way to look at scope is to see what you have around you, your team that you're working with. If it's solo, then it's just you. But if you have a team, you really got to figure out, what is your team confident in? Do you have a really strong artist, really strong animator, or is everyone just kind of, I dabble over here, I dabble a little bit, I'm not super confident in it, but I can do it. It's really important to know, the confidence level of each of those skills in your team. And from there, you can design the game to fit those skills. And I think the key thing is any skills that you have that you're less confident in, maybe you're not as fast in doing it, or the quality won't be that high, don't make the core design of the game rely on that skill. If you're not a great artist, don't make the whole concept of the game be about really cool art and animations. If you're not a great coder, don't think of this really complicated mechanic that requires math and 3D vectors and all that stuff. Stay within your skill set, and just, figure out what you're very confident you can do in a couple days and make that the core mechanic of your game. If you're a veteran, I think the best thing you can do is be a team lead. You're really good as an individual, but as a multiplier to your team, you can literally, you can have so much more impact. It's also a great way just to practice being a leader. If you don't really have that in, your day job or whatever you do, it's just a really great example of hey, I've led a team of 6, 7, 8 people, and we made this awesome thing. So there's a bunch of game jams. We do Global Game Jam every year, and that brings in a lot of new developers from younger people in college and just new developers, new game developers, and it's really great to get a bunch of those beginners and you be the veteran on that one team. So there's one really knowledgeable person and then a bunch of beginners. And that combination, in my experience, produces really awesome games. Yeah, but if you just have a group of beginners, often that doesn't really get to the finish line. They need someone to really focus and stay productive and actually get to the finish line. But this is super rewarding when you can actually pull this off. And this is my trick. If you're leading a team and you are the veteran, assume that you will do 75% of it. And if you have like 6 or 7 other beginners on the team, they will collectively do 25% of the game. So design a game and scope it such that you can do 75% of it. Don't say like, oh, I have 6 people, I can make a game 6 times as big. That's not how it works at all. Still stay within that small scope, and just the quality will end up much better because you have more people. Yeah. Next, this is really relevant if you are a veteran. Use it as a learning opportunity. You get these, these jams are really short, 2 to 7 days or something, and you can use that to really kickstart a learning process. If there's a tool that you've been trying to use, like, oh, I really want to try learning Unity, I really want to try Unreal or Blender or something, I think, yeah. Or like, oh, I'm a programmer typically, but I'm really interested in pixel art, I want to try that. I think game jams are the perfect testing ground for that, because it's really short. If you fail at the end of the 2 days, that's fine. It was only 2 days, But actually, in my experience, you don't really fail very often. You always end up with something. And then it's like, wow, that's another tool under my belt. Yeah, and if you're a beginner trying to challenge yourself, I would say don't. Okay, so if you're a beginner, stick to what you're very confident in, the tools that you already know, the skills that you already know, and try to make something based on that. Save it for your 2nd or 3rd or 10th or 100th game jam well, actually, no, yeah. 2nd, 3rd, or 4th, then you can start challenging yourself with new tools. Yeah, but on your very first one, stick to what you know. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So this is a tip that's really nice to build engagement with your game when you release it. I guess this adds to the fun factor and the memorability of your game. So you can keep track of a high score. This is like, it might be a single number that, ticks up or whatever. And you can just store that in memory. And this is like a really easy, small scope way to add some replayability to your game. For a beginner, I think beyond simple things like high score and timing and things like that, I would just focus on the core loop. Don't really worry about a start screen and a pause screen and an end screen and a game over and replay and all this extra stuff. Just make that core loop like the slide that Ruthie showed, where you just make the jump feel really, really good and make jumping around the level feel good. And if you have extra time, then you can worry about the start and end screen, but yeah, really just focus on the core. However, if you are a veteran, I think having that start and end screen, that first thing that the player sees when they load up, maybe it's a really cool animation or a logo or something and some instructions, and then at the end they get their score and it, here's your high score, how it compares with your old score and all that. Maybe there's like a new music track, some sort of fanfare at the end. It really adds to the sense that the game is a complete game. It's like, wow, I really had this full experience. Maybe it's super short. It's still 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes of gameplay, but it feels like beginning, middle, and end. Yeah, and so a speedrun timer is another really cool thing you can add, and to stay within your scope, but still give players that replayability. And I was talking to some developers also who have used speedrun timers, and a really big benefit that they mentioned is, your players will actually screenshot your game with their speedrun timer and start sharing it around Twitter and stuff. So it's actually a really easy way to get some more virality on your game as well. Yeah, here's another tip. Just in my experience is, if you spend around half of the jam writing the systems and the core mechanics of the game, and then the other half just creating content, creating new levels, things like that, you will end up with a game at the end of the jam that feels very big, actually. Oh wow, there's like 10 different levels you can play or something like that. And that feels very impressive for a game jam game. So yeah, if you're able to reduce the whole development part of your game into like one day, and then you can spend the second day just creating content, that is a really good challenge for veterans.
Choosing an engine. So this is something you see if you've ever been on like the game dev subreddit. Everyone's like, what engine do I use? Like every single day, right? I'm here to tell you that the engine you pick doesn't matter. Just pick something. This is you. You're saying, wow, that's interesting, but I don't care. Tell me what engine to use. Because people just ask it anyway. It will be asked forever and ever. So here's some popular engines that you can look up. So these are kind of, I think that maybe the top 10-ish engines that are on itch.io. So some of these are more beginner friendly than others. Things like Twine, which is a visual narrative engine where you don't need to know how to code to create these sort of branching narratives. Or other things like Construct 2 and GameMaker, I believe both have the sort of drag and drop editor. But it's fun to experiment with all of these. Oh, Bitsy's very easy to start up too. But it's fun to experiment with new engines. If you've done a game in Unity before, I've done a lot in Unity, it's fun to switch to something else. For example, here's some interesting things to try. I made a game in Roblox. I was like very resistant to it, I roll Roblox, but I thought it was a really interesting game dev process. It has really interesting constraints around what kind of content you can put in it. But there's all different kinds of things you could use to create a game, like PowerPoint or Google Forms. If that's all you have is a web browser, you can create a game. There's all kinds of new hardware, like the Playdate, that's very interesting to develop for. They have an open SDK where you can download that and start making games very quickly. Chatfuel is like a chatbot engine where you can make chatbots for Facebook Messenger. So that's a good way to get that in the hands of a lot of people on mobile. I've made sort of branching narratives or it's like dialogue based. So you can have it you could do like a Stanley Parable type game using a chatbot, I think. Social media bots sounds really interesting. I have no idea how to do that, but I think making a game using, say, a Discord bot would be a fun challenge. Things like Game Boy Studio, they're very constrained. You have to make a game that fits within 140 pixels or whatever it is. There's all kinds of vintage kids software like Click and Play. That's how a lot of people got started, is these sort of drag and drop kids games. You could also use your own engine. I don't know why I put that up. Don't do that. I mean...
If you're a true wizard with programming, then you can, yeah. I did actually, it was a 7-day game jam where I made a dating sim, and I didn't really, I used some off-the-shelf tools for rendering graphics on web, but I did make my own dating sim engine with, a script and everything and dialogue system. And that felt very appropriate for a 7-day-ish game jam, but maybe for 2 days it's not recommended.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the point here is that you can use a lot of tools that aren't meant for making games to make a game. So for example, Google Forms has sort of programming in it. You can do an if-then statement, basically. If the user clicks this option, then show them this other option. And you're a programmer. If you can do that, you are a programmer.
Oh, let's talk about art. This is my time to shine. Mm-hmm. Do we have any artists in here or people who want to make art? Woo!
Yeah.
All right. So a lot of what we've been talking about, especially if you're a beginner wanting to get into jams, is finding the thing that motivates you, whatever you feel like your strength is, what you like to create. Like if you're in a void and you have a piece of paper in front of you, what are you going to put on that paper? For me, it's like little cats and dragons and stuff like that. So lean on that. I found some examples here of games that are using simple art styles that lean on something specific. So empty up there on the corner, basically you could take a bunch of assets, like an asset pack of plants and buildings and pieces, and just put flat colors, pick a limited color scheme, and you have a theme you can work with. So everything here is simple. They're all jam games. Most of them were 48 hours. So, this game in the center with the dog, it's about playing Game Boy in the car on the way home. And it has like very simple inputs, and the art is very, super lo-fi, but it has a vibe, right? So you can work within those constraints to make something interesting. Or like this game on the side, Nothing to Say. If you like to draw characters, and you're not so strong on backgrounds, then just focus your game around one set piece, what you like to make, one character, and then keep everything else super, super simple. And if you're a little bit more like, oh, I love making lots of little pieces, make something board game-like. So just focus on what you really, really love, and just go all in on that, and everything else can just be set dressing. But for beginners, if you're creating art, it's the same thing that Momin was saying earlier. You got to start as simple as possible, and you should think, how few details can I make on this art? How few assets can I do and still communicate the core idea of my game? And that's that core idea that you should be able to explain in 5 seconds. People should be able to understand it right away. So don't think about details. Don't get bogged down in little particular things. Hide the hands. You don't have to draw them, like just show people what they need to know and nothing else, and then you can build out from there. Use familiar tools, but be open to learning new ones, especially if you're working on a team with people who can help you and guide you. But yeah, lean on your strengths and just push a little bit so that you can learn. But just check in with your team. If you have an experienced lead, ask them questions. Be like, what size, what format do I export my images for you? Like, if you don't know that, they will be able to tell you. So that's how you can quickly learn how to make game-ready assets, is just by whipping them out in a weekend for a game jam. You'll learn more than you will reading web pages and tutorials and not actually doing it. But yeah, just keep it moving. Don't spend precious hours perfecting stuff. You just want to get stuff out there and then refine.
The questions thing is so important. If you're working with a programmer, like knowing what format the programmer needs to get it in the game, that can be the difference between your art getting in the game or just sitting on your hard drive. So yeah, it's really important to ask that.
But if you can't do art at all, Momin.
Yeah, so someone like me who can't really do art, I see these talks pretty often, and I'm like, okay, that's cool, but I can't even draw a chess piece. So how am I going to make that chessboard? So I think there's still a lot of things you can do. So my recommendation is just use basic shapes with colors. I'll show some examples of these later, but basic shapes with colors, particle effects, which are also just basic shapes. It's usually just a circle with, fading colors and such. These are things you don't need to be able to draw at all to do. You can just throw them on screen. You can play around with the different sliders and everything and just see if it fits your vibe. If you are more on the programmer side, maybe you know how to do shaders already. And if you do, that's an awesome benefit, because you can just write code and it creates awesome graphical effects. So you don't really need to draw necessarily. So here's an example of a game jam that I did. This is when I decided, going back to what Ruthie said about have a goal for your game jam. For this game jam, I decided I will make a game that looks aesthetically pleasing with very simple shapes, because all my previous game jam games looked like horrible programmer art. So I just started with this, and you can see, if you look, all the individual pieces are literally just squares and circles. And I just decided to play around with the colors until I found some combinations that made sense. And then I built the game around that. And that really got me into this idea of hey, maybe you don't need to draw that much to make something that looks good. Here's another game jam that I made. This is literally 2 colors, and it's just inverted colors against each other. But I kind of animate them with, I rotate the hue of the color over time just to give this weird effect. It's completely unnecessary at all for the gameplay, but it's just a little detail that makes your game kind of have more of an aesthetic and look. And this is literally like a 1-line function to rotate the color hue. So yeah, if you're able to program a little bit, you can make effects like that. Just try to be creative with the little effects. If you're more of a veteran, doing this kind of stuff with basic shapes. I really enjoyed recently, I've been getting into mouse-drawn vector art, and it still looks really crappy, but you know, in my opinion, I mean, it's nothing like what they can do, but you get a little more details in there. You're not just limited to squares and circles and triangles anymore. You can do curves and all kinds of things. And you should definitely, if you've done this a few times, start to learn shader programming and 3D meshes and things like that, because then you can really break out of the box of, you know, squares and circles and such. So here's an example that I did. This is still using just triangles and circles. This is like a little Tamagotchi on your computer, and it eats your hard drive files. So you got to be careful with it. It'll like delete your System32 or whatever. But yeah, I just used some triangles and circles. But this background effect there, I was like, hey, let me just write a shader that does some weird effect. Doesn't really matter what it is. I just wanted some weird animation. Yeah, so I wrote, you know, I jammed on that for an hour or a couple hours or something and came up with an effect. Yeah. Here's another game that I made. So this one I was testing like gravity mechanics and stuff. But I drew these little dollar bills with eyeballs and such. I think I saw another Game Jam talk which had a really great tip where if you just put eyeballs on an object, people will think it's super fun and cute. So I was like, okay, I tried the eyeballs with the Chompymon and it didn't really look that good. So the next time I just drew some eyes with a vector, just with my mouse. I drew them with a vector program and it turned out a lot more cute. So yeah.
Cool. But if you can do art, I think the greatest thing about game jams, what I love most about it, is that you can use the limitations to inspire and challenge yourself. So, you know, really limited color palettes, pixel art, maybe moving from a 32 by 32 to like a 16 by 16 sprite, like just like really crunching stuff down and trying to like problem solve for that creatively. You can create really interesting things, especially if you're working with other people. You can explore low poly modeling or a different method of modeling, different type of rendering. You can emulate different eras of game art. Like people really love that, you know, PS1 aesthetic. Trying to, you know, incorporate that in an interesting way or emulate different like illustrative art styles, try to make a game that looks like a painting or like a lithograph print or something like that. Minimalism can be a great challenge to limit yourself. Maximalism is also a great challenge under a time constraint. And if you're on, same as what Momin was saying earlier, if you're the experienced veteran on a team, this happens a lot at college jams where there's like maybe 4 or 5 artists to 1 programmer on a team. You can sort of act as the art director and you can, you know, guide them to creating those assets or even take a step back, don't make the art yourself, but help them create those pieces so that they're for sure going to get in to the final game. And it's also good to document your process to share with others or to put it on your portfolio. It's a really good way to like demonstrate your workflow in a way that's really easy and tangible for people to look at if they're trying to evaluate, you know, if you're applying for a job, they can evaluate how you work with others, what your process is in a really bite-sized way. So this is an example from a jam that I did. It was a Ludum Dare. I worked with 1 programmer. So she was able to prototype the whole game in gray boxes pretty much by the 2nd day. So we were able to work asynchronously. So that means I was just able to, you know, be on my own, like sketching stuff, running it by her. She could do the same for me, but we didn't have to be stepping on each other's toes until basically the end of day 2. So we had tons of time just to like refine our own things individually and find a workflow that worked for both of us. And then we had the limits basically for like how much art we would need set very early, and then everything else would be added. You know, we had basically all of Sunday to just add and refine and add a start screen and all of that other stuff. So I made some choices here to kind of maximize, like I wanted to make a bunch of little creatures. I'm like, let's make some little guys run around. That's really all a video game is, right? But we chose to have no lighting, so we don't have to worry about building lighting, baking lighting. You like lose a lot of time every time you want to test your game. So we picked something shadeless. We picked something with a really limited color palette, something that I didn't have to draw anything. It was all just, you know, basic shapes with colors on them, and then cutting in areas if I wanted, you know, part of this lizard's face to be red. We could just, you know, add it in with the UVs really simply. But nothing too complicated. We made it board game-like so that we wouldn't have to be like an expectation of a walk cycle every time a character moved. You can kind of see they're just kind of, sliding into place, and with the tiles, you don't expect them to like have this crazy walk or run cycle when they're moving around. So the whole game was made. It's 3 characters with idle animations, 3 plants, 3 tiles, and that's pretty much it. So we had the whole game done before. We just added in the art later, and then we were able to build up off of that. So we leaned on our strengths individually, and we were able to get so much art done in a really, really short period of time. So that's just an example of like what you can do when you really like lean on your strengths.
And the small scope there, you only had 3 characters, and all those characters look awesome. Like, that's a really high quality. So that's the importance of keeping your scope small. You can have a really high quality.
Okay, let's breeze through audio. I don't think any of us are qualified to talk about it, but during a jam, you have to create all the assets yourself. So you have to have these tools in your toolkit.
Yeah, so I found using generators, synthesizers for sound effects like chiptone, which is based off SFXR, if you've heard of that. It's just a UI for dealing with that program, that synthesizer. But I would say if you're a very beginner, you can absolutely make your own sound effects. It's not that hard if you learn about this just a little bit. And I would say the key thing you should learn is the wave shapes. So if you search chiptone, you can play around with this app. But there's a bunch of different wave shapes, and they all have a different sound. And then there's this envelope, ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. Just look that up. Read about it for an hour or 2 until you kind of get a feel for it, and then go play around with it. Just those 4 parameters, along with the wave. So there's just 5 things you got to choose. Play around with that. You get a feel for like how to make a sound. What does this do to the sound? And that will really help you generate a ton of different sounds for your game in a short amount of time. And if you've done this many times already, I would say look at all these extra tools. If you look in that UI, there's a ton of extra things. Tremolo, arpeggiation, going up and down. There's like acceleration, so instead of having a straight line curve, you can actually have like a parabolic curve and things like that. Not necessary at all to make basic sounds, but it really helps your sounds stand out. And honestly, if you do a lot of game jams often and you play a lot of games made in game jams, you start to hear how the basic SFXR sounds feel. So if you're a veteran, you don't want your players to really think, oh, hey, that sound was made by SFXR. You want to add a little bit of like spice, a little bit of interesting, something that doesn't sound so generic into your sound. And then your game will feel much more complete. Yeah, and I'll say, in my experience, I think a lot of people neglect the EQ and compression variables. It kind of just raises the bass and treble and all that stuff. You can change those volumes. And that, if you mess with those, you can really get a really nice sounding sound that is not generic. Yeah.
Okay, music, speed round. So yeah, the hardest part for me is always the music. I have no idea what I'm doing, but there's all these tools available that you can use. I can do GarageBand on my phone. I can like make fart sounds into the phone and then somehow make like a little melody out of that. You can use real instruments, like this cool microphone. Does anybody have one of those? But there's also a lot of things like Wolfram tones. This is a cool website where you can generate music. You have to tweak it a lot to get it to sound like anything, but you pick a genre and a key and that sort of thing, and it can spit out some funny music for you. If you are a veteran, I have no idea what I'm talking about, but you could try a new digital audio workstation or a tracker. I have used Milky Tracker. That was a fun one to try and make chiptune stuff. But try something new, try a new piece of software, try a new instrument. There's lots of other people here who are way more qualified to talk about this, but this is how you do music, I think.
Yeah.
So building and compiling, don't forget to do this. Don't wait until the final hour to build your game. I don't know, there's like a law that says if you wait till the final hour to build your game, it won't build. You'll have errors and it won't build, and then you won't be able to submit. So set a goal to compile like a limited working version somewhere around halfway through the jam, just so you have something and make sure that it's actually compiling. User testing is one of those like nice to have things. It can really impact how balanced and fun your game is. A lot of people, you're running out of time and you neglect to do this, but I think it's a good idea to plan to have like the last 2 hours dedicated to user testing and then refining like the balance of your game so that it's actually fun and winnable. You have to make sure that people can win it, that it's not too hard or too easy.
The key things like difficulty, if you have like enemies with health and damage, tweaking those numbers up and down. If you just spend one or 2 hours playtesting it, you'll get much better numbers than just guessing.
Yeah, the last game that I did is sort of a life simulating board game kind of thing. And I don't think you can actually win it, and that's bad. Hosting and submitting. So some of these jams, like Ludum Dare, they'll have voting. So you have to host your game somewhere that people can download it, or even better, have it be able to play in a browser. So a website like itch.io is great for this. It embeds your HTML5 game right in the web page, and you can also customize the page to look nice. Here's a game that I did called This Little Piggy. I actually showed at MIVS like 5 years ago. But this is just a screenshot of the itch.io page. You can customize like the backgrounds and add headers and customize the fonts, and it'll host the game right in the browser. So that's important for getting more views or more plays. People are a little more hesitant to download something than to just play it right in the browser.
And even if you make like a Windows and a Mac download, a lot of game developers use Linux, turns out, and they'll get mad at you because you don't have a Linux build. So if you do an HTML game, everyone can play it.
Let's do this real fast.
Okay.
Um,
The more tactical tips, how to be nice to yourself.
Okay, yeah. Practicing self-care during a jam, really important. So drink water, take breaks, eat a vegetable, and go to sleep. Be good to yourself and the people around you. No, you should never behave badly or anything to the people who are also working around you. Be considerate of them. Most importantly, crunching is bad for you. You make worse work when you don't sleep anyway because your brain is like dying. So just go to sleep. Just do it. It's not worth staying up all night for days. Just go to sleep. You'll come up with problems for your, like your solutions for problems that you have the night before. They'll come to you in the morning.
And that's the scope too. Like don't scope that such that you have 48 hours of work, because you don't. You're going to sleep and rest. So scope around 24 hours of work,
Eat fiber.
Fiber is good.
We love
not
fiber.
Not just pizza all day.
Yeah,
So,
try to eat one meal that's not pizza.
yeah.
All right, so finding jams. There's all kinds of jam sites in person and online, especially post-pandemic. There's groups of all sizes and they happen all year long. So large jams like Global Game Jam will probably have physical jam locations. They do in like every major city and even non-major cities. But any college campus that has a design or a computer science department will probably host Global Game Jam. You can look up your local game developers group, like RVA Game Jams, or organizations like the IGDA. They'll also host them in various chapters. But if you want to do online jams, there are jams for every skill level, every interest, every genre, every theme. And if you go to itch.io/jams, that's a comprehensive upcoming jam list and calendar and everything for anything you could possibly want. Like, I'm serious, this is just a few days. This is like, you could have scrolled for like 4 or 5 pages, like down. Like, it's insane. There's fan game jams, there's not safe for work jams, there's horror jams, there's all kinds of things. Anything you could want, there's probably a little Discord server for you to go find that and find teams online. And then upcoming, there's Global Game Jam, January 30th through February 5th. So if you want to get in on this soon, there's that at the end of the month. There's also a game by its cover jam. Ruthie, do you want to talk about your experience with that?
So there's a cool art exhibit in Japan called Famicase where people make like fake Famicom cartridges. You design the artwork for these games. And so this jam involves using the artwork that people have created and actually bringing those games to life. So that's a game by its cover.
There's also the Haunted PS1 Demo Disc Jam. They do this really awesome jam every year now where people submit horror games that are in like PlayStation, PSX style. And then they release it sort of as if it's like this haunted demo disc that you found at like the flea market or something. They distribute it for free online. It's really amazing. The vibes are amazing. The community, they keep having to like lock the Discord because so many people rush it all at once and it's hard to moderate. But it's awesome. If you really like horror stuff, then that's the jam for you. There's a huge community. Other people will want to make games with you through that community, even if it's not for the official jam. And then there's, of course, Ludum Dare.
Yeah, Ludum Dare, we mentioned it a few times. If you haven't heard of it, it's global as well. It has around 2,000, 3,000 submissions. And what we really love about it is when you submit your games, all the other developers play your games, because the more you play other people's games, the more other people will play your games and vote and rate. So you get really good feedback, actually, and a lot of play testing and such. So it really helps you grow as a designer. Yeah.
It's a competition as well. There's no prizes or anything, but there's rankings for different categories like art, programming, mood, audio. Mm-hmm. So it's fun to set a goal to try and win like #1 in the funny category or something like that.
Yeah.
But that's actually going on right now, which makes me so sad that we couldn't do it right now. But it's twice or 3 times a year.
I think the next one is probably around April-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jam. Thank you guys for being an awesome audience. We'll do Q&A for the next 15 minutes. Yeah. If you want the slide deck, which has all the images and links and things to the tools we were talking about, you can scan that QR code and get the Google Slides. Yes, question in the front.
How do you find a team?
How do you find a team? So for Global Game Jam, the way that we've set that up is because we're also organizers of the group. There's a couple different ways we have constructed that. So sometimes we'll have people put names in a hat and you're kind of assign your team randomly if you show up to these in-person events. Otherwise, if it's an online jam, usually the Discord channel is kind of the best way to find people. You say, hey, I'm an audio person, I'm looking for a programmer. So I think Discord is kind of where people are nowadays.
Yeah, there's all this anticipation leading up to a jam, so everyone's trying to organize ahead of time, and that's really valuable because you save time at the jam. Yeah.
So, gosh, I used to do games on Commodore 64 in a very limited way, probably 30 years ago, and I've been walking around and seeing people do some stuff here, and I'm like, dang, it's just kind of jarring some stuff loose. What is like a real basic tool chain to do that sort of stuff on modern computers now?
You said like Nintendo 64 style? Commodore 64.
Commodore 64.
I would really recommend Pico 8, actually. Pico 8 is a virtual console, and it's trying to replicate kind of how Commodore 64 just gave you a command line, and you could just create graphics and write a function, change the graphics, write a function, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, very much recommend Pico 8 if you like that old school command line interface. Yes.
Is there a specific game jam or length of game jam that you recommend for your first game jam?
So the question is there a specific type or length of game jam that you would recommend for your first game jam? My recommendation is always the Global Game Jam because it's the biggest one and you're more likely to find people to work with. It's a 48-hour jam. I really like that length of time because it's usually Saturday, Sunday, so if you work during the week, it's very compatible with that. It's also kind of a low barrier to entry. If you set yourself up for a month-long jam, it's hard to commit to something like that if it's your first jam. So I would do 48 hours.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And do it multiple times. Like if you do 5 48-hour game jams as opposed to 1 2-week game jam, I think it's better to do the small ones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, back there.
Yes.
I was wondering what your guys' thoughts are, or have you ever used or considered using AI-generated content for like art, music, other aspects?
Yeah.
You mentioned like Wolfram Tunes, I think it was called. So yeah.
Yeah, I knew someone would ask that, and I'm glad you did. So the question is, what do you think about using AI to generate things like art or music, or maybe even programming in the future? This is sort of controversial for jams like Ludum Dare. They have a big, long post where they're considering all the aspects of it because you're only supposed to use content that you yourself created, but there's exceptions to that, right? People use samples in music. People use fonts. No, hardly anybody creates their own fonts, right? So there's this sort of gray area of like, well, we're already using, boilerplate stuff in Unity, all this kind of pre-made stuff. So what's the deal with AI? Why can't you use it? I don't have a good answer. Do you guys?
Do not have a good answer.
No,
Yeah.
there's no answers yet.
I
Everyone's
will say
figuring
though,
it out.
I will say before the latest batch of AIs came out, Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and GPT, there's a ton of generative code, generative art stuff that you could do, and it was never controversial. You could always use generated stuff in competition jams and things like that. It's only this latest batch that is really high quality with very little effort that it's starting to become more controversial. But I personally lean on the side of like, you can use it. If it's a difference between you making a game and not making a game, just use it. Use those generators, and because it's all about having that experience making a game.
Good question. Yeah.
Do you have any game art advice for someone who's colorblind?
Oh, yes. So the question is, do you have game art advice for someone who is colorblind? As in the creator is colorblind, or creating art for colorblind people? The creator is colorblind. That's interesting. So I used to give an accessibility talk. So this is kind of a flip of how I would present it. But basically, I had an art director who was colorblind, and he was amazing because he relied on contrast instead of color. So he hid the fact that he was colorblind. He didn't tell anybody, but he was still creating, he's an advertising art director. And so he's creating amazing work just using contrast. So maybe starting out in grayscale and then having someone else apply the colors for him. But contrast is always going to be more compelling than color anyway. You can create a game, you can distinguish characters from the background more easily using contrast rather than color. So that's, I think, a stronger way of most people starting out, right? Do you work in grayscale when you start? Or no?
Depends on the day.
Anybody else? Yeah. Can you give an example of a very overscoped project? Yes. Last Global Game Jam, I worked with someone who was like a narrative designer. He had so many ideas for, it's this sort of James Bond universe, and there's all these bad guys, and you ski down a mountain, but also there's items you collect on the mountain. It's kind of like ski free, but then you go collect the items, they go into a different universe, and then blah, blah, blah. I was just like, I could not, it's very hard to tell someone like, hey, we got to cut your ideas. It feels bad to say, yeah, let's not do that. Let's try to make like a guy skiing down a mountain. That's the whole game. And he's like, no, but I have all this awesome story. And I was like, we can't do this. So yeah, it was like horribly overscoped. The game was unplayable by the end.
That's a huge challenge with narrative, especially because it's free to write a whole new scene. You can write it super easily, but to actually implement it and draw it and code it, it's really hard. So if you can still have this big narrative, but the tools have to be small. Maybe it's all contained within one room, or it's all using the same mechanic, and you just use the mechanic creatively to tell different types of stories. Yeah.
My first game jam that I did with Tyler, who's sitting here, I had never programmed a game before, so I didn't know anything about scoping, and we wanted to make a game where you start out, it's in a zoo, and you're one animal, and when you click the button, you could transport yourself into another animal, so become another animal. So it was like 8 different animals and like all different walk cycles and different animations and everything for all of them, but basically just moving like a Unity camera from one object to another. So like that was simple enough, but the fact that we wanted to do like 15 different puzzles, he was like, no, absolutely not, the programmer. But we got it done. There was like a a huge bug in it where at some point the elephant would just fly into the sky for no reason. And then we couldn't figure out why, so we just kind of built that into the game.
Yeah. Yes.
So I've done a few game jams now, mostly in person. I kind of had this problem since I'm in the same community. I ended up working with like the same people. Or so I was considering working online next to the bar. Do you have any tips for kind of like communication or sharing work exactly or stuff like that?
Yeah, the question was, if you're doing an online game jam, do you have any tips for communicating and like keeping in touch with your team, I guess? Yeah, I would say I think it's always going to be harder than in person, but you can use tools like Discord. Ludum Dare has a great Discord, actually, if you want to find a team. But then once you find your team, create your own Discord server, and you can jump on the video chat or whatever, and just have the video sitting there. And it kind of doesn't really feel like you're in the same room, but if you have a quick question for someone, they're right there, and you can ask them. But yeah, I think having a voice connection with someone, like on video or audio, I think that's probably my biggest tip versus just doing everything through text. Yeah. Yes.
If you're part of one department and another department is struggling or you want to help them, what's the best way to go about helping them something that you're not confident in? Don't have skills.
It's a good question. So the question is, let me make sure I understand this. So you belong to one department, say programming, but then someone in, say, art is struggling. How do you help them while also doing what you need to get done too?
I would say, like, you got to communicate, right? You got to ask. You got to, especially if you're the leader of the team, you have to have a pulse on what everyone's working on. What is blocking other people? I think as a programmer, I've helped out with art a ton with things like, hey, I need to crop these 30 sprites into this specific format. I need to get rid of the background, make transparent background on all these things. And the artist can do that, but they have better things to do, right? If you're able to do these simple chores to kind of just, make things easier for the other person, just ask them. They'll definitely have something that you can do. Yeah.
I think it also helps to designate one person as a project manager or have one person who's just the project manager and that's it. Because they can set up checkpoints and say, oh, we want all the graphics in this folder by midnight. Or, check in on people, make sure everything is going to plan so that you don't wind up stranded at the end of it. In the turquoise.
Have you ever continued working on one of your games after a game jam? What contributed to that?
Yeah, so the question is, have you ever kept working on a game after a jam?
I have. I did a puzzle game for a global game jam where you kind of connect some lines. And I thought I was really proud of it in the beginning. I could have left it alone, but I got a ton of feedback from people that it was kind of unclear. So some aspects of it were unclear. So I just went back, spent another couple hours adding some extra textures just to make the game more clear. And I think another thing that motivated me is a website that posts games online. They found my game and they said, hey, well, can we license your game for like a couple $100? So I was like, okay, yeah, sure, better than nothing. And that gave me motivation to open the game back up and make some tweaks.
The other thing with that game, so we both did a global game jam where there was Red Bull had a contest where you could, it's called Mind Games, and they were like, submit puzzle games to this and you could win a prize. And the top prize was getting to meet the creator of Tetris in Hawaii. I don't know why it was in Hawaii.
He lives there.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, and it's headquartered there, yeah.
Okay, interesting. And so we both submitted that, and we didn't win, but someone we knew did win. So that was kind of cool. We got 500 euros. The exchange rate was really bad, so it was like less than that in dollars. But yeah, finding ways to enter contests or submitting to different sites like Newgrounds to get like new feedback and followers and adding achievements. The one game that I kept working on mostly was this little piggy. I saw that you could submit games to MIVS downstairs, the Indie Game Showcase, so I polished that up, submitted it to MIVS, and got in, so that I got to create a cool booth and do all the posters and hang out in the MIVS hall all weekend, which is a really, really fun and rewarding experience. You don't necessarily have to have like a fully released game or anything to be in it, so definitely recommend like taking something from a jam, polishing it, trying to do contests or shows. We've done like shows at the Smithsonian or at the Science Museum in Richmond.
Yeah, a lot of
things like that.
museums just like, they like indie games. They like getting into that realm, so you can show off your jam games there.
We're at time. We'll be up here if you want to chat in the hallway, but we got to get out of here so the next people can come in. Thank you all so much for coming.